After the death of her husband, Helen Montgomery tries to keep the family's tradition and values alive. But during a dinner, her daughter-in-law assaults her with boiling water and takes control of the institute she founded. In the hospital, Helen uncovers a multi-million-dollar corruption scheme led by her own family. Determined, she rises and prepares her comeback to unmask everyone before high society. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us from which city you are watching us. We continue. I promise this will be the best story you will ever hear in your life. The sun was setting over Belgravia, an upscale district in London, painting Edward Montclair's mansion golden. The neoclassical manor, with its meticulously maintained gardens and infinity pool, was a symbol of the empire built by Edward Montclair, who had passed away 3 years prior. Now his widow, Mrs. Helen Montclair, a 62-year-old lady with always well-groomed grey hair, held the family together with the same strength with which she managed the social works of the Montclair Institute. That night, preparations for the family's monthly dinner were in full swing. Ramona, the housekeeper, who had served the Montclairs for nearly 30 years, set the dining table with the silverware that only came out of the cabinet on special occasions. The long mahogany table, a family heirloom, was covered with a white linen tablecloth with carefully positioned tropical flower arrangements. "Mrs. Montclair, I think everything is ready. Would you like to check if it's to your liking?" Ramona asked, drying her hands on her apron. Helen smiled, her brown eyes revealing a kindness that years of privilege had not managed to erase. "It's perfect, Ramona, as always." She ran her hand over the table's surface, as if she could feel every memory lived there. Raphael and Amanda should arrive soon. Raphael was Helen's only son. At 40, he had taken control of the Montclair Group, a conglomerate ranging from civil construction to real estate development. With a degree in business administration and an MBA abroad, he was considered a successful man, although many behind the scenes at the company suspected his true talent lay in following the plans laid out by Amanda, his wife. The sound of the electronic gate interrupted Helen's thoughts. Through the window, she saw the black Mercedes entering the property. Raphael was driving, but it was Amanda who was in command. It had always been this way ever since they met in college, and now 10 years after their marriage, her influence over him only grew. "They've arrived," Helen said, adjusting her navy blue dress and running her hands through her hair. There was something in her tone that mixed joy and apprehension. A few minutes later, Raphael entered through the front door. Tall and broad-shouldered like his father, he had Helen's same kind eyes, though lately they were always tired. He kissed his mother's cheek and handed her a bouquet of lilies. "Your favorite flowers," he said, with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Behind him, Amanda entered as if stepping onto conquered territory. At 35, she was the image of urban sophistication, black hair cut in a perfect bob, designer dress, and heels that made her almost as tall as her husband. She carried a bottle of imported wine in her hands. "Helen, darling." The air kiss near her mother-in-law's cheeks was as cold as it was calculated. "I brought a special Merlot. I thought it would go well with dinner." Helen accepted the bottle with a polite smile. "Thank you, Amanda. Shall we go to the living room? Dinner will be served shortly." In the living room, while Ramona served appetizers, the atmosphere seemed tense. Raphael distractedly leafed through an architecture magazine, while Amanda incessantly typed on her phone. Helen tried to fill the silence with questions about the company, ongoing projects, and the charitable foundation maintained by the Montclair Group. "The Institute has a new project in Brixton," Helen commented. "We're building a cultural center, with a library and computer labs. The children need it so much." Amanda looked up from her phone, an enigmatic smile on her lips. "Speaking of which, Helen, we need to talk about the Institute. I think it's time for a renovation of the board. People who are more up-to-date with social responsibility trends." Helen felt a chill in her stomach. The Montclair Institute was her most precious project. Started with Edward over 30 years ago. "The Institute functions well as it is, Amanda. Our results are excellent." "Excellent but outdated," Amanda retorted, placing her phone on the table. "The world has changed, Helen. Charity is no longer just about running soup kitchens and building libraries. It's about strategy, marketing, visibility." Raphael cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable. "Amanda is right, Mother. The group's image needs an update, and the Institute is part of that. Helen looked at her son, feeling a pang of disappointment. The Institute is not a marketing tool, Raphael. Your father and I created it to give back to society a little of what we received. Amanda let out a short laugh. That mentality is precisely the problem. Modern philanthropy is an investment, not a moral obligation. Ramona, Helen called, trying to change the subject. Can we serve dinner, please? During the meal, the tension continued. Helen served the wine Amanda had brought, while Ramona brought the food: grilled fish with herbs, coconut rice, organic vegetables from the garden Helen kept in the back of the property. Is this what you always eat? Amanda asked, poking the fish with her fork. Perhaps we could hire a chef for these dinners. I know one who worked in Paris. He makes divine food. Helen felt her face burn. Ramona's food has always been sufficient for this family, Amanda. Sufficient for the past, perhaps, but the Montclair group today is something else entirely. We have standards to maintain. The silence that followed was heavy. Raphael ate, staring fixedly at his plate, avoiding confrontation. Helen realized that her son had become a stranger, shaped by his wife's ambitions. You know, Helen finally said, putting down her fork, my mother always said that true wealth isn't in what we have, but in what we are. An empty heart isn't filled with luxury. Amanda's face hardened. Her eyes, usually calculating, now gleamed with thinly disguised hatred. Interesting philosophy of life, Helen. Perhaps that's why the group needed a more pragmatic direction. Amanda, Raphael warned in a low voice, but Amanda was already on her feet. No, Raphael. I'm tired of these insinuations, this moral superiority. She pointed a finger at Helen. You think you're better than everyone with your talk of kindness, don't you? But the truth is you don't understand the modern world. You don't understand how things work now. Helen also stood up, calm despite the storm. I understand more than you imagine, Amanda. I understand that there are values that don't change, no matter how much time passes. That's when everything happened too fast. Amanda, her face contorted with rage, grabbed the teapot that was on the sideboard. The liquid was still boiling, freshly prepared by Ramona. Amanda, no! Raphael shouted too late. Helen's scream cut through the air as the boiling water hit her arm and part of her chest. The pain was instant, searing. She fell, feeling her skin burn. Ramona rushed to her aid while Raphael looked on in horror. My God, what have you done? He finally reacted, running to his mother. Amanda remained still, the teapot still in her hand, an expression of shock replacing her fury. She deserved it, she murmured, more to herself than to the others. Helen, on the floor, feeling her skin raw, looked at her son. There were tears in her eyes, not just from the physical pain, but from understanding finally how much she had lost. It wasn't just her body that was burned. It was also the last trace of love that still existed in that house. The London Clinic, in South London, housed stories of pain and hope in its impeccably clean corridors. In room 307, Helen Montclair watched the city from the window, the skyscrapers stretching as far as the eye could see. Her arm and part of her chest were covered with special dressings for second-degree burns. The physical pain, though intense, did not compare to the emotional wound she carried. 3 days had passed since the incident. 3 days without a single visit from her son, only vague messages transmitted by the nurse. Your son called, said he's arranging everything for your transfer. Transfer where? Helen didn't know. Raphael wasn't answering her calls, and the family's lawyers gave evasive answers. Mrs. Montclair, time for your medication, announced Nurse Marcia, a middle-aged woman with a gentle face and skillful hands. How are you feeling today? Helen forced a smile. Better, thank you. You had visitors while you were sleeping, Marcia informed her, checking the IV drip. A very elegant lady said she was your friend. Left those flowers. Helen looked at the orchid arrangement on the table. There was a card with it. Could you pass it to me, please? Marcia handed her the card, and Helen recognized the handwriting immediately. It was from Louisa Campbell, her childhood friend, now a renowned doctor. I heard what happened. I'm here for whatever you need. Call me. With love, Louisa. A tear rolled down Helen's face. Amidst her family's abandonment, that gesture of friendship was like water in the desert. That afternoon, while watching the news, Helen saw her son's face on television. Raphael Montclair was inaugurating a luxury residential complex in Leith, Edinburgh. By his side, Amanda smiled for the cameras, dazzling in a red dress. The presenter spoke about the power couple of the British real estate market and their newest project, the expansion of the Montclair Institute, now presided over by Amanda. Modern philanthropy demands innovation, Amanda told reporters. The Montclair Institute is entering a new era, more connected to the country's real needs. Helen turned off the television, feeling her stomach churn. The Institute was her legacy, built with decades of dedicated work. To see Amanda appropriating it as if it were a marketing piece was too painful. The phone in the room rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was Louisa. "Helen, how are you?" Her friend's voice conveyed genuine concern. "Surviving," Helen replied, trying to sound stronger than she felt. "I heard rumors about what happened. Is it true it was your daughter-in-law?" Helen hesitated. "Louisa, I don't want to talk about it over the phone, but yes, it was complicated." "I'm coming to pick you up tomorrow," Louisa declared firmly. "I've already spoken with your doctor. You'll continue your treatment at my clinic in Bath. Fresh air, tranquility, away from those negative influences." "But Raphael said that—" "Raphael isn't here, is he?" Louisa's voice had a tone of indignation. "Helen, you need to get away for a while, trust me." After hanging up, Helen was pensive. Perhaps Louisa was right. Perhaps she needed distance to understand what had happened to her family. The next day, against the recommendations of the Montclair Group's lawyers, Helen left the hospital accompanied by Louisa. The journey to Bath, a city about 2 hours from London, was silent. Helen watched the landscape change, the skyscrapers giving way to green mountains, feeling that each kilometre distanced her not only from London, but from an entire life that now seemed to belong to someone else. Louisa's clinic was located in a historic manor house, surrounded by lush gardens and overlooking the countryside. It was a place of healing, not just for the body, but also for the soul. In the first few days, Helen slept a lot, exhausted by the physical and emotional trauma. Gradually, she began to participate in therapeutic activities, walks through the gardens, physiotherapy sessions to regain movement in her arm, conversations with the psychologist recommended by Louisa. "How are you feeling today?" asked Dr. Clara, the psychologist, during a session 2 weeks after her arrival. Helen looked out the window, watching the hummingbirds in the garden. "It's strange. I feel like I'm waking up from a long dream, or perhaps entering one." "What kind of dream?" "One where I believed I knew the people around me, my son especially." Helen took a deep breath. "You know, Dr. Clara, I spent years trying to keep the family together after my husband's passing. I believed I was doing what was best for everyone, but perhaps I was naive." "It's not naivety to believe in the people we love, Helen," Clara replied. "It's hope, and hope can be rebuilt even when broken." During the weeks that followed, Helen established a routine. Mornings were for physiotherapy and walks, afternoons for reading and sessions with Dr. Clara, evenings for quiet dinners with Louisa, when her friend wasn't busy with other patients. It was at one of these dinners, almost a month after her arrival, that Helen received an unexpected visit. "Someone wants to see you," Louisa announced, with a serious expression. "Charles Miller. He said he worked for you at the Institute." Helen felt her heart quicken. Charles had been the Montclair Institute's accountant for over 15 years, until he was mysteriously dismissed 3 months ago. "You can send him in." Charles entered the dining room with hesitant steps. He was thinner than the last time Helen had seen him, and there were deep circles under his eyes. "Mrs. Montclair," he said, his voice trembling, "I'm sorry to show up like this, but I needed to speak with you. When I heard about the accident, and then couldn't reach you, I became worried." Helen indicated the chair opposite her. "Sit down, Charles. What brings you here?" He looked nervously at Louisa, who understood the hint. "I'll leave you two," she said, excusing herself. When they were alone, Charles took some documents from his briefcase. "Mrs. Montclair, you need to know what's happening with the Institute. In fact, what has been happening for at least 2 years." 2 years? Helen frowned. "Even before Edward's passing?" "Yes. It started small, almost imperceptible. Misappropriation of funds, donations that never reached their destination. inflated contracts. Charles ran a hand through his grey hair, visibly tense. At first, I thought they were administrative errors, but when I questioned them, I was sidelined. And after the change in presidency, things got worse. Helen took the documents with trembling hands. They were spreadsheets, contracts, printed emails, a complex web of transactions that, to an untrained eye, would seem normal, but which Charles had carefully marked and annotated, revealing an elaborate scheme. "The Institute is being used for money laundering," Charles explained. "Phantom projects, shell NGOs, and the money goes to offshore accounts linked to a company called Veritas Investments." Helen felt her blood run cold. Veritas was Amanda's maiden name. "Does my son know about this?" Charles hesitated. "Mrs. Montclair, the documents authorizing these transactions have his signature, but whether he fully understands the scheme, I cannot say." Helen's hands trembled as she leafed through the papers. There it was, documented. The reason for Amanda's insistence on taking over the Institute. The sudden changes in the board, the dismissal of long-time employees like Charles. It wasn't about modern philanthropy. It was about using the Montclair Institute's reputation for illicit enrichment. "Why are you showing me this now, Charles?" Helen asked, her voice almost a whisper. "Because I tried to report it, Mrs. Montclair, and 3 days later, my apartment was broken into. They took my computer, my files." Charles shivered at the memory. "They left a message. Next time we won't just take the papers. I fled to the countryside where I have family. But when I heard what happened to you, I couldn't stay silent." Helen felt a mix of gratitude and terror. Charles was risking himself by coming to her. And she herself was in danger, she realized. Perhaps the accident with the boiling water hadn't just been a fit of rage from Amanda, but something more calculated. "What do you intend to do, Mrs. Montclair?" Charles asked after a long silence. Helen looked out the window, at the Bath Mountains bathed in moonlight. She felt a determination growing within her, something she hadn't experienced in a long time. It wasn't hatred or a thirst for revenge. It was a deep sense of justice. "I'll need time, Charles, and your help." She turned to him, her eyes shining with new resolve. "First, I need to fully recover. Then, we will bring the truth to light." That night, for the first time since the incident, Helen slept without nightmares. The scars on her body began to heal, and with them a new version of herself was born. One that would not be intimidated, one that would protect the legacy she and Edward had built with such love. The path would be long, but Helen Montclair had found her strength again. Spring in Bath covered the gardens of Louisa's clinic with vibrant colours. Helen, sitting on a bench under a century-old tree, observed the bromeliads and orchids growing there. 3 months had passed since her arrival. Her body was practically recovered, although the scars on her arm and chest remained visible, physical reminders of an emotional wound that still throbbed. "I thought I'd find you here," Louisa said, approaching with 2 cups of tea. She handed one to Helen and sat beside her. "The results of your latest exams have arrived. You are clinically recovered, my friend." Helen nodded, sipping her lemon balm tea. "My body is, yes. As for the rest—" She left the sentence hanging in the air. "Dr. Clara said you've made remarkable progress," Louisa commented, "but she also mentioned she's noticed a certain determination in you in recent weeks." Helen smiled enigmatically. "It's time to go back, Louisa." "Go back? To London?" Louisa frowned. "Helen, I don't think that's a good idea. From what Charles told us—" "That's exactly why I need to go back," Helen interrupted, with a firmness that surprised her friend. "I cannot allow them to destroy everything Edward and I built." Since Charles Miller's visit, Helen had spent hours studying the documents he had brought. In recent weeks, more information had arrived: bank statements, archived internal audit reports, emails exchanged between Amanda and Montclair Group directors, her veritable dossier that Charles had managed to compile before his forced departure from the Institute. "And what do you plan to do?" Louisa asked, concern evident in her voice. "Helen, these people didn't hesitate to hurt you before. So imagine what they'll do if they find out you know about their schemes." Helen placed her cup on the bench, her eyes fixed on the horizon where the mountains met the sky. "I've thought a lot about this. I can't confront them directly. That would be naive. I need to be strategic." She turned to her friend, a gleam of determination in her eyes. "I'll need your help and a few other people." The next morning, the law firm Albright & Partners, located in the historic centre of Bath, received an unexpected visit. John Albright, a 70-year-old lawyer known for his unwavering ethics, had been a close friend of Edward Montclair. "Helen!" he exclaimed, rising from his chair when his secretary announced the visitor. "What a wonderful surprise." They hugged, and John immediately noticed the visible scars on Helen's neck. "I heard rumours about what happened," he said, indicating a chair for her. "But you know how high society is. Distorted stories." "That's why I'm here, John. To tell the truth." Helen sat down, placing a thick folder on the table, "and to ask for your help." For the next 2 hours, Helen laid out the entire case to John: the assault, the discoveries about the misappropriation at the Institute, the evidence collected by Charles. The lawyer listened attentively, making occasional notes, his aged face wrinkling more with each revelation. "What do you intend to do with all this, Helen?" he finally asked. "Justice, John, not revenge." She adjusted herself in the chair. "I want to regain control of the Institute. I want those responsible to answer for their actions, and I want to protect the legacy Edward left." John took off his glasses, rubbing his tired eyes. "You have substantial evidence, but confronting your own son and a woman like Amanda Montclair won't be easy. They have power, influence, contacts. And I have the truth, and you." Helen smiled, reaching out to hold his hand. "Edward always said that if he ever needed a warrior with the law as a weapon, it would be you he'd turn to." The old lawyer seemed rejuvenated by those words. Edward was a good man, better than many in that circle. He put his glasses back on, determined. "I'll need a few days to study these documents and devise a legal strategy. But there's something that worries me, Helen." "What?" "Your safety. If they discover you know about the schemes and that you're acting—" Helen nodded. "I've already thought about that. In fact, I have a plan." In the days that followed, Helen met with a small group of trusted people: Louisa, John, Charles and Ramona, the former housekeeper who had been dismissed by Amanda shortly after Helen's accident. Together in a back room of John's office, they devised a careful strategy. "Their weak point is vanity," Helen explained, pointing to an event calendar on the wall. "In 3 weeks, the Montclair Institute's Grand Charity Ball will take place. It's the social event of the year in London, where Amanda will make the official announcement of new projects and partnerships." "How do you know that?" Ramona asked. "Because I receive the invitations every year," Helen replied with a bitter smile. "This year was no different. They even sent one to the hospital before my mysterious transfer." John leafed through some documents. "The timing is perfect. We'll have enough time to organize everything with HM Revenue and Customs and the Serious Fraud Office. If we act correctly, we can ensure that investigations begin right after the event." "No," Helen said firmly. "I want to be there. I want to see it in their eyes when everything comes to light." Louisa stood up, agitated. "Helen, it's too risky. Amanda already tried, well, she's already proven what she's capable of. And we're talking about a public event with hundreds of people." "That's exactly why it will be the perfect place," Helen replied. "She would never try anything in front of so many people. Besides," she took a golden envelope from her purse, the official invitation to the ball. "I am the guest of honor for the night." Everyone looked at her, perplexed. "What do you mean?" Charles asked. "It was the marketing department's idea, apparently," Helen explained, with irony in her voice. "A tribute to the visionary founder, now recuperating from health issues. A good story for the press, to mask the fact that they forcibly removed me." John began to understand. "And they don't know you've recovered, much less that you've discovered the schemes." "Exactly. They believe I'm in some private clinic, almost an invalid, unable to question anything." Helen looked at each of her allies. "We'll use that arrogance against them." The plan began to take shape. John would use his contacts in the Serious Fraud Office to initiate a formal investigation, but would await the right moment for the warrants to be executed. Charles would organize all the documentation and provide a formal statement. Louisa would provide medical backing, confirming that Helen's burns were deliberately caused by Amanda, and Ramona, who had witnessed everything, would complete the picture. "But there's still one piece missing," Helen said thoughtfully. "We need to know exactly what Amanda will announce at the ball. Which projects, which partnerships. The more information we have, the better we can prepare." It was then that Ramona, the housekeeper who for years had been almost invisible in the Montclair household, surprised everyone. "I can help with that. I have a niece, Deborah, who works as a waitress at the events company Amanda hired for the ball. She can be our eyes and ears inside." A week later, in a discreet cafe in the center of Bath, Helen met Deborah, a young woman in her 20s with keen eyes and clear determination. "Aunt Ramona told me everything," Deborah said after introductions. "What they did to you and what they're doing to the Institute. It's revolting." "I need you to understand the risks, Deborah," Helen warned. "If they find out you're helping us—" Deborah nodded, serious. "I understand the risks, but I also understand what's at stake. I grew up in the Montclair Institute's art workshops in Peckham. If it weren't for you—" She hesitated, emotional. "Now I see the new directors cutting these projects, saying they're not economically viable. As if art and education had to make a profit." Helen felt a wave of emotion. The Institute had touched so many lives over the years. It wasn't just about money or prestige. It was about real transformation, about opportunities for those who needed them most. "Have you managed to get any information?" Helen asked, regaining her composure. Deborah took her phone from her purse, showing photographs of documents. "I took these photos from Mrs. Amanda's folder when she was at the event company's office. These are the guidelines for her big project announcement." Helen examined the images, feeling a tightening in her chest. The plan was even worse than she imagined. Amanda intended to announce the complete restructuring of the Institute, transforming it into a social investment foundation. In practice, this would mean the end of direct welfare projects, replaced by strategic partnerships with companies linked to the Montclair Group. A perfect facade to continue the misappropriations on an even larger scale. "This is—" Helen searched for words, indignant. "A betrayal of everything you and your husband built," Deborah completed. "But there's more. I overheard Mrs. Amanda on the phone. She plans to announce that you have decided to permanently step down, transferring all legal control of the Institute to her." Helen felt her blood run cold. "That's impossible. I never signed anything like that." "Perhaps they didn't need you to sign," Deborah suggested in a low voice. "Not if they have other means." The implication hung in the air like a dark cloud. Document forgery, another crime for the growing list. Back at John's office, Helen shared the new information with the group. "This changes everything," John said, concerned. "If they announce this transfer of control, even if it's with fraudulent documents, it will be much harder to reverse later." "Then we'll have to act before the announcement," Helen concluded. "During the ball, but before Amanda goes on stage." "How will we do that?" Louisa asked. Helen looked out the window, watching the sunset over the Bath Mountains. In recent months, she had been forced to reinvent herself, to find a strength she didn't know she possessed. Now she was about to take the most difficult step, publicly confront those who had tried to destroy her. "I'll need a dress," she finally said, a determined smile on her lips. "After all, I am the guest of honor for the night." The Balmoral Hotel sparkled under Edinburgh's night sky. Limousines and luxury cars paraded through the main entrance, dropping off the country's business and social elite. The Montclair Institute's Grand Charity Ball, traditionally held in London, had been moved to Edinburgh that year, another of the changes implemented by Amanda. Inside the grand ballroom, decorated with white orchids and crystals, guests mingled in evening wear, champagne glasses in hand, polite conversations masking interests and negotiations. Photographers from society magazines recorded every detail, every rehearsed smile, every seemingly casual encounter between entrepreneurs and politicians. Raphael Montclair, in an impeccable tuxedo, talked with the Minister of Infrastructure in a corner of the ballroom. His face showed tension despite the polite smile. Every now and then, his eyes scanned the room as if searching for an invisible threat. Amanda, on the other hand, was the image of confidence. In a red haute couture dress, she navigated among the guests with the grace of a queen in her kingdom. Every gesture, every word, every look was carefully calculated to reinforce her image. As the new leader of the Montclair Empire and a visionary of modern philanthropy, "Raphael, darling," she called, approaching her husband and the minister. "Excuse me for interrupting, but the journalists from the Times would like a photo of us for the event coverage." Raphael nodded, excusing himself to the minister and following his wife. When they were out of earshot, he murmured, "Are you sure everything is ready for the announcement?" "Absolutely," Amanda replied, without losing her smile. "The transfer documents are perfect. The tribute video to your mother is edited to make it seem like she approves everything, and the contracts with the new partners are already signed." She lightly squeezed her husband's arm. "In an hour, the Montclair Institute will officially be ours, and no one can dispute it." Raphael swallowed hard, discomfort evident in his eyes. "What if my mother shows up? If she's better? And your mother is practically an invalid in some clinic, Raphael," Amanda cut in, maintaining her smile for the photographers watching them from afar. "Even if she tried to show up, our security guards have specific orders. Now smile and act like the president of one of the country's largest business groups." Outside the hotel, a discreet taxi parked a block away. From it emerged Helen Montclair, unrecognizable to anyone expecting to see the gray-haired lady of 3 months ago. Her hair, now dyed a dark brown and cut into a modern bob, framed a subtly made-up face, highlighting her determined eyes. The long petrol blue dress, with three-quarter sleeves that discreetly covered her scars, gave her a timeless elegance. "Madam, are you sure you don't want me to accompany you?" asked the driver, who was none other than Charles Miller. "I am, Charles." "You've done more than enough. Now head to the agreed spot and await John's signal." Helen adjusted the small clutch bag where she carried her phone and a copy of the most important documents. "If everything goes as planned, we'll meet in 2 hours." Helen walked with firm steps to the hotel entrance. Her heart was racing, but her determination did not waver. At the entrance, she presented the golden invitation and her ID to the security guard, who quickly checked the guest list. "Welcome, Mrs. Montclair," he said, returning the invitation. "You are the guest of honor tonight, correct?" "Exactly," Helen replied with a serene smile. Upon entering the hotel lobby, Helen felt curious glances in her direction. Some guests recognized her, despite the change in appearance, and whispers began to spread like waves. "Is that Helen Montclair? I thought she was ill. I heard she had a nervous breakdown after her husband's death." Helen ignored the comments, walking elegantly through the lobby to the main ballroom. At the entrance, she was approached by a young woman from the press liaison team. "Mrs. Montclair, what a wonderful surprise. We didn't know you would come personally. Your daughter-in-law informed us you would only send a thank you video." "I decided that some things need to be said personally," Helen replied, with an enigmatic smile. The young woman seemed momentarily suspicious, but soon regained her professional composure. Of course. It will be an even greater pleasure to have you with us. Please accompany me to the main table." As she was led through the ballroom, Helen carefully observed the environment. She quickly identified the stage where speeches would be made, the exits, the security guards. She also noted, with satisfaction, the presence of several journalists and, in a discreet corner, John Albright talking to a man in a sober suit, whom she recognized as being from the Serious Fraud Office. Her gaze finally found Raphael and Amanda, who had not yet noticed her presence. They were surrounded by businessmen and politicians, Amanda gesticulating animatedly as she spoke. Helen felt a pang in her heart seeing her son, the boy she had raised with so much love, now a man who had allowed her to be hurt without doing anything to stop it. It was at that moment that Amanda saw her. The smile froze on her face, her eyes widened in genuine shock. She squeezed Raphael's arm so hard he almost spilled his champagne and whispered something in his ear. Raphael turned slowly, and when his gaze met Helen's, the color drained from his face. Helen held their gaze calmly, nodding slightly in recognition before proceeding to the main table. The young press liaison pulled a chair for her, exactly next to the place reserved for Amanda. An ironic detail that did not escape Helen. Please make yourself comfortable, Mrs. Montclair. The event will officially begin in 20 minutes with Mrs. Amanda's opening speech. Afterwards, we'll have the tribute video to you and, well, now I suppose we'll have your live speech." The young woman seemed genuinely enthusiastic, oblivious to the tension that was beginning to build. "Thank you," Helen replied simply. As soon as the liaison moved away, Helen sent a discreet message to John. "I'm positioned." They saw me. Across the ballroom, Amanda dragged Raphael to a discreet corner, panic barely disguised on her face. "How is she here?" she hissed, her fingers squeezing her husband's arm. "You said she was incapacitated, isolated." I thought she was," Raphael stammered. "The last information we had, wrong information, obviously." Amanda took a deep breath, trying to regain control. "This changes everything. She cannot be here during the announcement." Raphael looked at his mother, sitting at the main table with a serene dignity he hadn't seen in years. "What do you intend to do?" "Move up the schedule. I'll make the announcement right now before she can interfere." Amanda adjusted her dress, recomposing herself. "Go to the stage. Talk to the Master of Ceremonies. Say there's been a change in the program. Amanda, I don't know if—" "Do as I say, Raphael." She fixed him with a hard stare. "Or would you prefer to lose everything we've built?" As Raphael headed to the stage, Amanda signaled to the head of security, a burly man with an earpiece. He approached discreetly. "We have a situation," she said in a low voice. "The lady in blue, main table. After my announcement, I want her escorted out. Politely but firmly. She's not mentally well." The security guard nodded. "Understood, madam." Across the ballroom, Deborah, dressed in her waitress uniform, observed everything. Discreetly, she took her phone from her pocket and sent a message to Charles. "Plan changed. They're moving up the announcement." Helen, at the main table, received the information through John, who approached under the guise of greeting her. "They're going to try to anticipate it," he murmured, as he kissed her hand in a formal gesture. "The SFO agents are positioned, but we need the announcement to be public to characterize the attempted fraud." "Understood," Helen replied. "Let them begin." The Master of Ceremonies went on stage earlier than expected, adjusting the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, there has been a slight change in our program tonight. It is with great pleasure that I now invite the president of the Montclair Institute, Mrs. Amanda Montclair, for her special address." Polite applause echoed through the ballroom as Amanda, composed and smiling, made her way to the stage. She ascended gracefully, acknowledging with discreet nods. As she positioned herself at the microphone, her eyes met Helen's for an instant, a silent duel of wills. "Good evening, everyone," Amanda began, her melodious voice amplified by the sound system. "It is with immense joy that we welcome each of you on this special night. The Montclair Institute, as you know, has been a pillar of British philanthropy for decades, thanks to the pioneering vision of its founders, Edward and Helen Montclair." She paused dramatically, looking in Helen's direction. "Unfortunately, as many know, after Edward's untimely passing, our dear Helen faced serious health problems, which prevent her from continuing to lead the Institute. A painful reality for all of us who admire her." A murmur ran through the ballroom, as guests looked curiously at Helen, who maintained a neutral expression. "That is why," Amanda continued, "in accordance with Helen's expressed wish, I officially assume today the permanent presidency of the Montclair Institute, with the commitment to modernize it and expand its reach through innovative strategic partnerships." It was then that Helen stood up. A sudden silence fell over the ballroom. All eyes turned to the elegant figure in petrol blue. Amanda froze on stage, her smile faltering. "Pardon me, Amanda, but I believe there's a misunderstanding," Helen said, her voice clear and firm, cutting through the silence. "I don't recall expressing such a wish." A wave of whispers swept through the room. The journalist present, sensing that something important was happening, discreetly approached, cameras and recorders ready. Amanda quickly recovered, forcing a sympathetic smile. "Dear Helen, how wonderful to see you so well. But as we discussed during your recovery, the transfer documents were signed in March. Perhaps with the trauma, your memory—" "My memory is perfectly functional, Amanda," Helen replied, walking slowly towards the stage, "as is my ability to recognize a forged signature." The murmuring increased. Raphael, standing beside the stage, looked as if he was about to faint. The head of security took a step forward, but John Albright and the man from the Serious Fraud Office blocked his path. "Ladies and gentlemen," Helen continued, gracefully ascending the stage, positioning herself beside an increasingly pale Amanda, "I believe everyone deserves to know the truth about what really happened to me, and about what is happening to the Montclair Institute." An absolute silence fell over the ballroom. Hundreds of eyes fixed on Helen and Amanda, side by side on stage, a scene no one expected to witness that night. Camera flashes fired incessantly, capturing the moment that everyone sensed would go down in the history of British high society. 3 months ago, Helen began, her voice clear and firm, amplified by the microphone. "I was a victim of an assault in my own home." She paused, her eyes sweeping over the attentive faces in the audience. "Boiling water was poured over my body, causing severe burns that required months of treatment." A shocked murmur ran through the ballroom. Amanda tried to intervene, her smile now completely shattered. "Helen, darling, I don't think this is the moment for—" "It is exactly the moment." "Amanda," Helen interrupted without altering her tone, "especially when you are about to announce a transfer of power based on forged documents." Raphael, visibly disturbed, went on stage. "Mother, please, let's talk in private. You're not—" "Well?" Helen completed, turning to her son with teary eyes. "I am more lucid than I have been in years, Raphael, and it's time for the truth." She opened the small bag she carried with her, taking out an envelope. "I have here the medical reports that prove the assault as well as the testimony of Ramona, our housekeeper for 30 years, who witnessed the moment Amanda poured boiling water on me after an argument about the Institute." Amanda visibly paled. "This is absurd, a distorted interpretation of a domestic accident." She turned to the guests, trying to regain control. "Helen has been under heavy medication, confused, suggestible. I also have," Helen continued, ignoring the interruption, "the results of an independent audit conducted at the Montclair Institute over the past 2 months. She took another document from her bag. "This audit reveals a systematic scheme of resource diversion, money laundering through phantom projects and shell organizations, all connected to offshore accounts linked to the company Veritas Investments." The whispers grew louder. A journalist at the back of the room could be seen frantically typing on his phone. Another filmed everything with an expression of astonishment. "Veritas," someone near the stage murmured. "Isn't that Amanda's maiden name?" Amanda, now visibly shaken, grabbed the microphone. "This is a pathetic attempt by a bitter woman to sabotage the legitimate work we are doing. Helen never accepted that the Institute needed to modernize, that her welfare ideas were outdated." "Modernization?" Helen raised an eyebrow, maintaining her calm. "Is that what we call diverting money intended for social projects nowadays?" She turned to the audience. "The Montclair Institute built schools in underprivileged communities, maintained cultural programs in deprived areas, offered scholarships to young people without opportunities. In the name of modernization, these projects have been systematically dismantled in recent months, replaced by partnerships with phantom companies that exist only on paper." Raphael, who until then seemed paralyzed between his mother and his wife, finally found his voice. "Amanda, what is she talking about? What offshore accounts? What phantom companies?" Amanda shot him a furious look. "Don't be naive, Raphael. You signed all the documents because you told me they were necessary restructurings." Raphael's voice trembled. "You said they were formalities to modernize management." "And you never questioned, never checked, never really cared," Amanda retorted, now abandoning any pretense of cordiality. "As long as you could continue your comfortable life with your yacht, with your travels." Helen watched the exchange with a mixture of sadness and determination. Her son had been manipulated, yes, but he had also allowed himself to be blind out of convenience. Both were truths she needed to accept. "Ladies and gentlemen," Helen spoke again, regaining the audience's attention, "I am not here for revenge or resentment. I am here because the Montclair Institute represents decades of serious work, committed to genuine social transformation. I am here because I cannot allow this legacy to be destroyed by greed and opportunism." It was then that the ballroom doors opened and several men in suits entered in a coordinated manner. Leading them was a woman with a serious expression and grey hair, whom Helen recognized as prosecutor Marina Fletcher, known for her work in corruption cases. "Excuse me," the prosecutor announced, approaching the stage. "I am Marina Fletcher, from the Serious Fraud Office. We have a search and seizure warrant for all documents related to the Montclair Institute and Veritas Investments, as well as an order to freeze assets of those involved in the scheme, reported by Mrs. Helen Montclair." The ballroom erupted in murmurs. Amanda, now completely out of control, tried to leave the stage but was blocked by 2 agents. "This is an outrage," she screamed. "Persecution, a conspiracy orchestrated by a bitter old woman." Raphael watched everything in shock, as if finally waking from a long dream. He looked at his mother, then at his wife, and finally at the agents who were now spreading through the ballroom, collecting documents, computers, phones. "Amanda," he murmured, taking a step towards his wife. "Is it true? All this time you were diverting money from the Institute." "Don't be a hypocrite, Raphael," Amanda spat, her eyes flashing with hatred. "You never cared about the source of the money, as long as there was enough to sustain your lifestyle." It was at that moment that Deborah, still in her waitress uniform, discreetly approached Helen, handing her a USB drive. "I recorded everything," she whispered, "from the moment you entered, including Mrs. Amanda's confession just now." Helen nodded, grateful, and handed the USB drive to Prosecutor Fletcher, who received it with a nod of approval. The guests, recovered from the initial shock, began to divide into groups, some trying to leave the event discreetly so as not to be associated with the scandal, others watching with morbid fascination the unfolding events, and still others, especially those connected to genuine social causes, approaching Helen with expressions of support. "Helen," a familiar voice called. It was Beatrice Madison, an old friend and director of an NGO that had always partnered with the Institute. "We are with you. We always knew something was wrong with the recent changes." Helen smiled, genuinely moved. "Thank you, Beatrice. We'll need to rebuild much of what was destroyed." "And we'll be by your side," Beatrice assured, squeezing her hand. Across the ballroom, Amanda was being formally notified of the proceedings she would face, while her phone and documents were seized. Her face, once haughty, now showed a mixture of rage and fear. She cast a last glance at Helen, not of regret but of defiance, as if to say that this battle was not yet over. Raphael, meanwhile, seemed completely lost. He timidly approached his mother, his shoulders slumped in a posture Helen hadn't seen since he was a teenager and had committed some mischief. "Mother," he began, his voice choked. I didn't know the extent. Amanda always said they were just necessary modernizations." Helen studied her son for a long moment. There was so much to say, so much to process. Years of estrangement, the betrayal, the complicit silence when Amanda assaulted her. "Raphael," she finally said, "this is not the time for this conversation. You will have to answer for your actions or omissions, just as Amanda will. And then we'll see what's left to rebuild." He nodded, crestfallen. "I'm sorry. I truly am." "Being sorry is not enough," Helen replied without hostility, but with firmness. "Repairing the damage caused, that would be a start." Prosecutor Fletcher approached again. "Mrs. Montclair, we will need your formal statement tomorrow. For today, I believe we have enough to initiate legal proceedings." "I will be available, Prosecutor Fletcher," Helen replied. "What will happen to the Institute now? By court order, the administration will temporarily return to your hands until the entire situation is clarified and those responsible are duly prosecuted." The prosecutor offered a rare smile. "Your friend, Mr. John Albright, was very persuasive in presenting the preliminary evidence." Helen nodded, grateful. John approached, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "It's over, Helen," he said. "Or rather, it's just beginning. The reconstruction will be a challenge, but you won't be alone." Helen looked around, at the Serious Fraud Office agents escorting Amanda out of the ballroom, at Raphael talking to his lawyer in a corner, at the journalists who now approached eager for statements, at the Institute's old partners, who came to offer support. She felt a strange peace, not of victory or revenge, but of justice being done. "You know, John," she said, allowing herself a tired sigh, "when all this started, I just wanted to protect the legacy that Edward and I built. But now I understand it was about something bigger, about integrity, about not allowing evil to triumph just because it seems stronger." She looked at the scars on her arm, now partially visible where her dress sleeve had ridden up. These marks will never completely disappear, and perhaps that's good. They will remind me that I survived, that I faced what seemed impossible, and that I emerged stronger on the other side. Outside, reporters who had not managed to enter the event waited anxiously. The first news was already leaking to social media. Scandal at Montclair Institute. Founder denounces scheme of resource diversion. Businesswoman detained during charity event after accusations of fraud and assault. Helen knew that the following days would be intense. There would be statements to give, documents to analyze, difficult decisions to make about the Institute's future and about her relationship with her son. But for the first time in a long time, she felt in control of her destiny, ready to start anew. As she left the Balmoral Hotel that night, accompanied by John and Louisa, who had discreetly arrived to provide support, Helen paused for a moment to look at the ocean beyond Princes Street. The waves broke on the sand in a constant eternal rhythm, destroying and renewing, always in motion. Like life, she thought. Like her own story. Shall we go home? Louisa asked gently. Helen smiled. Yes, home to start over. The next morning, headlines dominated newspapers and television programs. The Montclair case, as it quickly became known, sparked heated debates about corporate ethics, philanthropy, and the misuse of resources intended for social causes. Experts analyzed leaked documents. Investigative journalists unearthed connections between Veritas Investments and other suspicious companies. Editorialists discussed the implications for the third sector in the UK. In the apartment Louisa kept in Mayfair, London, where Helen was temporarily staying, the phone didn't stop ringing. Press officers, former Institute collaborators, long-lost friends, all wanting to speak with the woman who had unmasked one of the largest schemes of philanthropic resource diversion ever discovered in the country. You don't need to answer everyone now, advised John, who had stopped by to discuss the next legal steps. Focus on the essentials. The rest can wait. Helen nodded, distractedly flipping through one of the newspapers that showed her photo alongside Amanda on stage at the Balmoral Hotel. The contrast between one's serenity and the other's despair was striking. What will happen to Amanda? Helen asked. John sighed, taking off his glasses to clean them. Her situation is serious. In addition to the accusations of resource diversion and document forgery, there's the assault against you. The evidence is substantial. It's likely she faces years in prison. And Raphael? The lawyer hesitated. It's more complicated. Technically, he signed documents that authorized the fraudulent transactions. But if we can prove that he was deceived, that he had no real knowledge of the nature of the documents, Helen closed her eyes for a moment. Her son, the boy she had cradled in her arms, taught to walk, watched grow and become a man, now facing the possibility of being judged for serious crimes. He needs to take some responsibility, she finally said. As painful as it is for me as a mother, I cannot protect him from the consequences of his choices. John nodded, respecting the difficult decision. And what about the Institute? Provisional administration was granted to you, but we need to decide on the long-term future. Helen stood up, walking to the window. Outside, London pulsed under the morning sun, the parks beginning to fill, the cafes opening, life continuing its course despite everything. The Institute will return to its origins, she declared. Direct social projects, total transparency and accountability, genuine partnerships with serious organizations. We will need a new team, people committed to ethical values. It will be a challenging restart, John pondered. Many partners may have distanced themselves after the scandals. Then we will win over new partners, Helen replied with determination. And we will regain the trust of those who distanced themselves. The Institute has always been greater than any person. Greater than Edward, greater than me, certainly greater than Amanda. It is a commitment to social transformation. Louisa, who listened silently to the conversation while preparing coffee in the open-plan kitchen, smiled with admiration for her friend. The Helen she saw now, determined and visionary even after all she had faced, was the same strong woman she had known decades ago. Before social conventions and the expectations of her role as wife and mother in London high society made her diminish her own light. You've always been a force of nature. Helen, Louisa commented, bringing 3 cups of coffee. You just forgot it for a while. Helen smiled, accepting the cup. Sometimes we need to lose something to remember who we really are. She lightly touched the scars on her arm. These marks reminded me. The phone rang again. This time Helen decided to answer. It was Beatrice Madison. Helen, we're organizing a meeting with old partner organizations of the Institute. Everyone wants to hear your plans, offer support for the reconstruction. Would you come speak with us? Helen looked at John and Louisa, who nodded encouragingly. Of course, Beatrice. When and where? Tomorrow at the Barbican Center. At 10 in the morning. It will be something small, just the oldest and most trusted partners. I'll be there, Helen promised. After hanging up, she sat down again, a new sparkle in her eyes. It seems the reconstruction begins sooner than we expected. Spring arrived in London, covering the gardens of the Montclair house with colourful flowers. 6 months had passed since the night of the grand charity ball, and Helen's life had completely changed. The garden, once impeccably maintained by hired gardeners, now displayed a wilder charm, with beds of native British wildflowers that she herself had planted, aided by Ramona, who had returned to work for her. The mansion also looked different, simpler, more welcoming. Helen had donated much of the old furniture and artwork to museums, replacing them with more functional and comfortable pieces. The immense reception halls, rarely used, were converted into workspaces for the new Montclair Institute team. That morning, Helen was having coffee on the back veranda, watching the hummingbirds visiting the flowers in her garden. She wore a short-sleeved blouse, no longer bothering to hide the scars on her arm. With time, she had learned to see them not as marks of suffering, but as symbols of her survival and rebirth. Mrs. Montclair, Ramona called, approaching with a folder of documents. Dr. Madison has arrived for the meeting. Thank you, Ramona. Can you ask her to come out here? It's too beautiful a day to be stuck in an office. Beatrice Madison, now Executive Director of the Montclair Institute, appeared moments later. At 55, with grey hair cut in a modern bob and lively eyes behind colourful framed glasses, she exuded energy and competence. Good morning, Helen, she greeted, hugging her friend before sitting down. I brought the preliminary reports for the new project in Tottenham. The community is extremely receptive, especially after we involved local leaders in the planning. Helen poured coffee for her friend. That's always how we should have worked. Not for communities, but with them. Beatrice nodded, opening the folder and spreading documents on the table. The music school already has over 100 enrolled, and we haven't even officially started. And the small business incubator has a waiting list of local entrepreneurs. And the funding? Helen asked, leafing through the documents. Surprisingly good, Beatrice smiled. After we implemented the system of total transparency, with weekly online updates on every penny spent, several old partners returned, and new ones joined, impressed with the approach. Helen smiled, satisfied. It had been an arduous battle to rebuild the Institute's credibility after the scandal, but the first fruits were beginning to appear. The strategy of radical transparency, combined with a return to the fundamental principles of direct social work, had proven correct. How are things with the board? Beatrice asked hesitantly. Helen sighed. The Institute's new board of directors, formed after the crisis, included representatives from the communities served, educators, social development specialists, and some businessmen of long-standing ethical reputation. It was a more diverse and representative structure than the old board composed exclusively of businessmen and socialites. There are still resistances, Helen admitted. Some more traditional board members find it difficult to accept the idea of sharing decision-making power with community representatives. But we are moving forward. The last meeting was quite productive. Beatrice smiled, understanding. Cultural changes take time. The important thing is that we are on the right track. They spent the next hour discussing operational details of ongoing projects, until Ramona reappeared with a hesitant expression. Mrs. Montclair, I'm sorry to interrupt, but... She paused, uncomfortable. Mr. Raphael is here. He said he would like to speak with you, if possible. Helen and Beatrice exchanged surprised glances. Helen had not seen her son since the preliminary court hearing 4 months ago. On that occasion, Raphael had accepted an agreement with the Serious Fraud Office, taking partial responsibility for the fraudulent acts and committing to cooperate with the investigations in exchange for an alternative sentence. "I think I'll leave you two alone," Beatrice said, gathering her documents. "We can continue this tomorrow at the office." "No, stay," Helen requested, gently holding her friend's arm. "Please." Then turning to Ramona, "You can ask him to come out here." Minutes later, Raphael appeared on the veranda. He looked different, thinner, unshaven, with deep circles under his eyes. He wore jeans and a simple shirt, far from the corporate elegance he used to display. "Mother," he greeted, his voice low. "Dr. Madison." "Raphael," Helen replied, indicating a chair. "Would you like some coffee?" He nodded, sitting down with movements that denoted weariness. "Thank you." An awkward silence hung over the table as Ramona served the coffee. Beatrice discreetly picked up her phone and pretended to check messages, giving mother and son some illusion of privacy. "How are you?" Helen finally asked. Raphael shrugged. "Surviving. Community service is enlightening." Part of his alternative sentence included 2,000 hours of work on social projects. "Where are they putting you to work?" "At an elderly care home in the East End, 3 times a week." He took a sip of coffee. "At first it was humiliating. Now, I don't know. There's something comforting in the simplicity of the work, in doing something that truly matters to someone." Helen studied her son carefully. There was something different in his eyes, a shadow of humility that had never been there before. "And Amanda?" she asked, mentioning her daughter-in-law's name for the first time in months. Raphael visibly tensed. "I haven't seen her since the divorce was finalized. She refused all visits in detention." Amanda had been sentenced to 8 years in prison for fraud, resource diversion, document forgery, and grievous bodily harm. The sentence, considered exemplary by the judiciary, had been celebrated by many as a sign that white-collar crimes were finally being treated with the rigor they deserved in the UK. "I'm sorry," Helen said, and was surprised to realize she truly was. Not for Amanda, but for her son, for all he had lost, even if through his own choices. "I should be the one saying that," Raphael replied, looking directly at his mother for the first time. "I'm sorry, Mother, for everything, for not seeing what was happening, for allowing Amanda to mistreat you, for being blind and cowardly." Helen took a deep breath, feeling a complex mixture of emotions, pain from the memories, relief at finally hearing a genuine apology, caution born of experience. "Why did you come here today, Raphael?" she asked, opting for frankness. He took an envelope from his pocket, placing it on the table. "I received this yesterday. It's the official notification of the end of the process against me. I fulfilled part of the agreement. I will continue with community service, but legally I am free." He hesitated, choosing his words. "So I realized I never really talked to you since that night. Never explained." "There's not much to explain," Helen interrupted softly. "You made choices, Raphael. Perhaps you didn't fully understand the consequences of those choices, but still they were yours." He nodded, crestfallen. "I know I have no right to ask for anything, but I'd like to try again. Not as it was before. That would be impossible. But perhaps with time." He left the sentence unfinished, uncertain. Helen looked at her son, the boy she had raised, the man who had lost his way, the broken person who was now trying to find a new path. It was easy to love the perfect son of her memories. Much harder was to love this fallible man, who had contributed to her suffering. "Forgiveness is not asked for, Raphael," she finally said, echoing the words she had said to herself so many times during her recovery. "It is earned day by day with actions and choices." He nodded, a glimmer of hope in his tired eyes. "That's fair. We're recruiting volunteers for the new project in Tottenham," Beatrice interjected, breaking her silence. She looked at Helen, as if asking permission, and continued after a slight nod from her friend. "It's difficult grassroots work, directly with the community. Nothing glamorous or comfortable." Raphael looked at the executive director, surprised by the unexpected offer. I don't know if I'm qualified." "No one is initially," Beatrice replied, pragmatic. "That's why we have a training program. If you're truly interested in rebuilding and making a real difference, well, we can talk." Helen observed the exchange, feeling a mixture of apprehension and hope. Part of her wanted to protect the institute from any connection to the past scandal. Another part recognized the opportunity for genuine redemption that was presenting itself. Think about it, Helen finally said. You don't have to decide now. Raphael nodded, a small tentative smile on his lips. Thank you for considering. When he stood up to leave, Helen noticed something that had initially escaped her, a worn book sticking out of his jacket pocket. She recognized the cover immediately. Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Paulo Freire, the same book Edward used to quote when they discussed the philosophy behind the Institute. Are you reading Freire? She asked, indicating the book. Raphael seemed slightly embarrassed. One of the elderly residents at the shelter is a former professor. He's been lending me books talking to me about how to really make a difference in people's lives. Helen felt a lump in her throat. Perhaps, just perhaps, there was hope for her son after all. Goodbye, Raphael, she said, standing up to accompany him to the door. Goodbye, Mother, he replied, hesitating for a moment before adding, I like what you've done with the garden. It's more alive. After Raphael left, Helen returned to the veranda where Beatrice waited with a concerned expression. Are you sure about this, Helen? Bringing Raphael back near the Institute, even if as a volunteer. Helen sighed, sitting down again. I'm not sure of anything, Beatrice, but I know everyone deserves a chance to start over. That's what I did myself, wasn't it? Beatrice smiled, nodding. Yes, and look where we are now. She checked her watch. I need to go now. I have a meeting with the Imperial College London team about the mentorship program. After Beatrice left, Helen remained on the veranda, contemplating the garden and reflecting on the turbulent months that had passed. The Institute's recovery was just beginning, as was her own journey of healing. There would still be many challenges ahead, many difficult decisions to make. Her phone rang, pulling her from her thoughts. It was Louisa. Helen! I'm at the airport, just arrived. How was the meeting with Raphael? Helen smiled at her friend's voice. Complex, painful, hopeful. Can we talk when you get here? Of course. I'll be there in an hour. And I brought that wine you love. After hanging up, Helen walked through the garden, touching the flowers with affection. She felt at peace, despite the uncertainties that still hung on her horizon. The truth had come to light. Justice was in progress, and the Institute was returning to its roots. Her house, once a place of isolation and then of betrayal, was becoming a home again. Not the same as before, that would be impossible. But a new home, built on the foundations of the old, preserving what was valuable and letting go of what no longer served. The scars on her arm told a story, as did the invisible scars on her heart. They were part of her now. They didn't define who she was, but they reminded her of the path she had traveled. That afternoon, when Louisa arrived, she found Helen in the garden, planting new yellow ipe saplings. Planning for the future, Louisa asked, observing the small trees that would one day become giant blooming ones. Helen smiled, standing up and wiping the soil from her hands. Always? After all, that's what it's about, isn't it? Planting seeds today to harvest flowers tomorrow. The two friends walked back to the house together as the sun began to set on the London horizon. Life went on, transformed, rebuilt, reborn from the ashes of all that had been lost. And Helen Montclair, who had once been broken by the fire of hatred, now burned with the tranquil flame of determination. Not a flame that consumed, but one that illuminated the path for herself and for everyone around her. The end. Dear listeners, we hope Helen Montclair's story has touched your hearts. The journey of this extraordinary woman shows us that even in the most difficult situations, we can find strength to start anew and transform our pain into purpose. To continue this emotional journey, we have prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories about overcoming adversity and renewal. Find it here by clicking the link to your left. If this narrative resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave a like on this video. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the complexity of human life, with characters who face challenges, fall, get up, and move forward, just like all of us. Let us know in the comments what part moved you the most. The discovery of the scheme, the confrontation at the ball, or perhaps the reunion of mother and son. Your interaction helps us create content that is increasingly closer to what you want to hear. Until the next story, with more emotions and reflections on the incredible journey that is life.